Thank you, Richard. Just make a few thank yous myself. I've taken this open source laptop along and it's caused a lot of issues. So thanks to the tech team and Richard for getting this going. We're going to start on their laptop and let the demo do that. This is my debut as a speaker. So thanks to organizers for coming, and most importantly, thank you guys for going to listen. So let's get going. There's been three parts to the talk. Set the big picture, then going to about data science is really just some case studies, some characters that are new to the industry, to maybe get started to read their blogs, their tweets. And all being well, we'll try and do some live data mining of that, we'll look at some code and some screenshots through there. Right. I enjoy physics, so you will see a lot of physics metaphors, and my physicists tell me that it all started with a big bang. But I'm sure we know in this audience it didn't start with a bang, it started with a dot. And a very special dot at that, a .com. So the web, 95, is Ramos just said, was getting content onto the web with its brochureware and e-commerce databases, but it was the start of data. We had a great fun, we had a party, and at the end of that there was the period we called the nuclear winter, and nuclear reactions, there was new particles formed. And one of the key ones was the Moore's Law had got to a stage where the economics of hosted servers, which we could prang on lots of counts, and the ISPs, Ramos just said, made the party more exciting. We were in dial-up, we went to broadband, and this phenomena that I started paying people to buy applications that sent them to their friends, their family, and of course, as Mark Zuckerberg famously is quoted, is open and share ratio, which is growing at a quicker rate than Moore's Law. Hopefully this is all making sense, and what we now term as Web 2.0. And we're still keeping this thing going, but in the last few years it's got really big. The physicists call this inflation, but you could just call it big. So what's going on here? Data web's been the title of this talk, but the expression I've heard used is Web 2.0 square. So we have to remember that social is still at the heart of this next push of the web. People bring in mobile. I just like to think it's the internet catering for more devices. But we have cloud computing replacing, I would say, the Moore's Law. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later. But I like to think of cloud computing as something more than just the raw hardware getting cheaper. So some other intelligence feeding into the stack that makes everything clever. And these two things are obviously connected. But this is making the thing bigger and bigger. More sharing, more content, more sharing. And so we have a problem. And the solution is data science. The data web. So just before I conclude this, it's like very high level, but we have to make the assumption that when we're building something new, there will be existing data that kickstarts the web experience. It will always be working even though you're maybe not using that application at the time. And so we have a result on every web experience will be personalized as a given assumption. So like the universe, data is expanding at an ever-increasing pace. I think we're on this journey to free computing. I think the only major obstacle is getting zero-energy data centers. I think they're working on that too. This real-time personalization, and then this embryonic science of data science, or as I like to call it, science applied to society. So you see this trend in physicists applying themselves to biology and sort of become evolutionary biologists. And some of us geeks are listening to that and applying some of their ideas. So what is data science? It requires wearing 3 hats, and those 3 hats can appear. Actually, Bill Gates is not wearing a hat, he's just wearing a PowerPoint presentation. People talk about engineering as in software engineering, so you've got the skill set that if you're a web developer or software engineer you'll be familiar with. Mathematics, statistics, machine learning, and of course the last one is communication, and that may be to your PowerPoint, maybe an infographic, it may be the core to your product, or it may be just an API service to get your data to someone else's product. So O'Reilly's got this great paper, it's called An Introduction to Data Science, or something like that. I'll get the link at the end of the presentation. So it goes on a cycle, and the fundamental point is, where does the data come from? And there's so many sources, there's many web pages. But the key point I like to make here is that later on we'll be making some sense of this, but if you don't have the right database or data in the system that contains the answer, there's no magic that's going to magically give you the answer. So getting the right data in and allowing it in is mission critical. So once you have it in, they call it data conditioning. I always smile here because PHP's been great at creating these CMS systems which give us nice markup around about the content that the author wanted to do. Of course, we need to get rid of that. I'm kind of brutal. You even give them tools to do tagging, and semantic web people give you fancier tagging. I have to get rid of that too. It's my personal, because I want to get what the essence of the human wanted to author. Though others like to harness that tagging. But anyway, we're interested in getting the data back to its simplest form, which then allows us to scale. I've got a bit of a contrarian view on scale, but we'll come to that at the end. But obviously, if we're taking like Twitter feeds, Facebook feeds, or RSS feeds from blogs, that once you've got one, you might want many. So you need infrastructure. So we have the NoSQL movement and your MySQL movement. Now the interesting part, I was really puzzled to which word to put in here. O'Reilly writes this document in text, and there's no real, it's like, I think this is just the data science bit, but it's actually making some new value out of existing content. He calls it a data product. So you're actually doing something new. This data doesn't exist that you have to magically apply. And of course, on its own, it's useless. So you need to tell a story, and that's where your PowerPoint or your API call comes along. And of course, because you've created new data, then that's out there for other people to use, and the cycle goes as it goes. So I declared myself an open source data scientist because I'd seen other people starting to rally around the term. And I think each of them, were off to sort of preview, had various titles in their organizations, and they all seem a lot happier that they can tag themselves with something. So let's go and see what these characters are. Didn't go too long before Jeff Hammerbacher, if I pronounced that right, came across my feed. He is probably Mr. Data Science. I may get his career slightly wrong, but I think he started doing computer science or some mathematics at university, then joined a Wall Street firm where he was dealing with real-time data and financial data. But then he seen the opportunity with Facebook, so he became the first data science at Facebook. I think he then became briefly a venture capitalist, or was somewhere there, and then Cloudera came along, and he got to apply all these ideas about big data there. So what he's trying to do here is going back to the three parts of the data web, the cloud computing. He wants everything in there. He wants to just get your data there, he wants to tidy it up, he wants to do business intelligence on it, he wants to do machine learning on it, and deploy that as a service. And just yesterday I noticed there was a talk at eHarmony, because I thought that was one of their clients. One of their other data scientists was talking there. But it shows you that their customers, like eHarmony being the dating website, have got lots of data and they've got a matching problem. So they're very interested in having it as a service rather than having to invest in the whole stack to do cloud computing and Hadoop and reduced map and all that stuff. So you're going to have this play in the enterprise side on tap, hopefully zero hassle. Hilary Mason, the first thing to say, I wish I could present like Hilary on this topic. But my personal takeaway from listening to what Bitly's got a unique view on data because they've got all our tags from multiple services. So if you're at I don't know, Twitter or Clout, you've got the Twitter stream in some shape or form, whereas you could have a delicious tag to a Flickr tag. They've got a wide variety, so they get a different view of the universe of data. And this is an interesting point that we all see the same data from a different angle. That allows you to extract different value. So it's almost limitless what the value is out there. LinkedIn, I think they were really happy to get the term data scientist because they were like the real little research hub within LinkedIn, but they didn't want to be in the R&D department. They wanted to be at the heart of the product. And so once you got your profile up on LinkedIn, it was like, oh, you may have worked with these colleagues, or you're interested in this area, so here's your potential friends. So this all came out of the data science team and core to their product. I'm not going to say too much about e-commerce because we've got a great keynote coming to start the day tomorrow. But Amazon has a data scientist called John Russer, and while these businesses depend upon you pressing buy, and that creates the transaction, and they take their margin on it to hopefully make some money, they're increasingly realizing that the probability to purchase is actually their core business. Because you can transact, it's just which service you're going to transact, which product's going to be the best one. And so the more they can do to help you get there, then the more successful their business is. Right, myself, I think I've lost my bag, but Ramos said he'd been writing PHP his entire life. I think I'm at the other end of the spectrum. So this is my first application, and this version that works is my first object-oriented PHP. But I've been doing startups most of my life, but I have this vision which I call lifestylelinking.net. And my transition to becoming a software engineer started when I was listening to the guy called James Sorwowski at Yahoo in about 2007-08, and he'd written a book called The Wisdom of Crowds. And the key, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with the wisdom of the crowd, but the topic that was particularly hot in debate at the time was prediction markets. So whether it was predicting the price of silicon chips, or who was going to win the 10:30 at or the football match, or whatever sporting activity it was. But it struck me that the key message was whatever the prediction was, if they used fake money or tokens, it was easier, it was a better result to get the right price or discover the price. And I basically thought to myself, given we all live in tomorrow, predicting our own futures, was what would happen if we could actually bet our choices with our life? But this did have a problem, as with how was I going to measure my life? Well, Twitter and Facebook were sort of primitive beasts back then, but the idea was that we could somehow categorize our lives and then use that as a currency to then make predictions on what content or where we'd go in the future. And we'll see a little bit about big to small in a minute. So we like to think that this data science is going mainstream. The data web is clearly growing in terms of volume of data. There's events like strataconf.com, which is on next week, and you've got the end of March, you've got a thing called Structure in New York. So it's like the third version, I think, of Strata and Structure. So it's just a community seems to be welling around this topic, and the machine learners are there, the semantic web people are there, the hackers are there, the biotech guys are there. Everybody seems to be interested in the topic. I think every data scientist I've had talk or listened to a video always talk about curiosity. And I'm just hoping this cat's not looking at a black widow spider, but it's imagination as much as anything else is what you could potentially do with the data is the key. There'll be no shortage of data. It's just what do you want to do with it? And it's better set out with a hypothesis of what you want to achieve than trying to just make something up on the fly. Right, so I think I might go for a change of computers here, that's all right. I don't know if anyone's got any questions for those first two topics. No? So a bit like the talk, going to set the scene about three sort of types of data mining as I see it and how I look at the world. And then I'm going to go through 3 examples, hopefully working, and then wrap up. We have little meetups in Aberdeen, Scotland, and I get to cut my teeth and talk about data mining. And I usually put a slide up of Anodin or paracetamol, and then ask the audience if anyone's got a headache. And if 1 or 2 people might put their hands up, and I usually say, well, if you do have a headache, it's off to get a lot worse. And if you don't have one, you might have one in the next 10 minutes or so. But hopefully I've enhanced or improved my presentation on that, but time will tell. So I like to think about granularity, and what I mean is, are we interested in what's going on in the whole universe? Or is it our solar system? Or is it just the here on Earth? And on web, that might be the whole of the web, Google's mission to organize it, blog posts, my mission to see if I can understand my life and author them those, or very specific, is it a product, a location, or even the sentiment that's being expressed in a particular sentence. So statistics, Google Analytics, I'm not going to say too much about that because you've probably used it, but this definition of making the product, the data in a new product. So the best example I think of this sort of high level is Flickr. You've got that little icon of your chart of the usage. I seem to use that a lot. So I don't know, it's like happy, go ahead, or I just find it interesting that, like when it starts to snow, that all my skiing photos from 3 years ago start to become more popular. So I'm currently rewriting my lifestylelinking.net open source project, and the first stage of it is taking in sources of blogs, RSS feeds, and an API call to Wikipedia for certain words, doing some stuff with that, and basically the goal is to present your blog in the categories that you do it. So rather than it time-based or the way you authored it, or you may have tagged it, say swimming, the idea is that the application on itself would figure that out. And why would that be useful? So the example I like to give is, so I do swimming, skiing, and other sports as well as tech. So that I do backcountry skiing, so I climb up mountains and ski down in Scotland. I'm going to be in the Bay Area next week. I might get up to Heavenly, but I really like to go backcountry skiing. So the idea is that I've identified in my blog how I like to ski. There'll be all these other bloggers in this areas that ski in their way, and the idea is I'd do lifestyle linked to some of those bloggers, and then find the appropriate blog posts where they've gone backcountry skiing. I could either hook up with them, or then there might be enough information to go on the same trail. So that's the goal of the application. Right, so before we get into the code, trying to give you a sort of high-level view of what's going on and how I've designed it. So we have the data coming in, blogs and Wikipedia. Me data is not in the application yet, but that would be your Fitbit data. I've just had my 23andMe profile. So anything, basically, in the quantified self-movement. And queuing logic I came to PHP UK for the first time last year, and I was in a mental mire because I had all these feeds coming in, and I basically batch processed it. But the number one in the data cycle, where's it coming from? And if it's not in, I can't get the answer. And the batches were quite big at that time. So I went to the ZOMQ talk by Ian, and so I was pretty excited that just now the plug-and-play library within the framework, which I think is mission critical. We can't even get started really without that. So I was looking at building a Node.js, something prepared to do the job, and now great, the grassroots, the community have given me something I can use. Then we have to do some core logic, as I call it, but that's just some magic, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail. And then we've got this thing saying, well, even though I've done the sum, has any data come in that might be more relevant? And I haven't figured out what the science is behind that, but if there's 3 posts and they're all skiing, and I was interested in skiing, I might let them in. But it's kind of hard to always know, because there might be a huge volume, and identify the ones that are skiing without going through the processes, the chicken and egg scenario. But anyway, we'll get some data, and then we need to display it. So we will do that. So just on this is core. So I have the blog coming in, which I call content. I've got a definition which comes from Wikipedia. So the question is, why did I choose Wikipedia? Going back to the wisdom of the crowd, the goal in this project is to crowdsource everything. And I've got a slide somewhere, it looks like going, but I think I'll just skip it. The thing is, anywhere I make an assumption, I make lots of assumptions, I'm unhappy. I want to crowdsource that answer. And so I could have gone to English dictionary or my own definition of what skiing was, but that would be one view of the word. At least at Wikipedia, there was a community that had the potential to have more than one person authoring the definition. But actually, I know the definition that I want exists. It's every bit of content that's ever been issued in the history of mankind about the subject. The chicken and egg is, how do I identify it? My goal was to get this rough characterization to identify most of the blogs, and then I can rescore on everything that's happened within those. And so I'm tending towards the vocabulary the real world's using to describe the activity that I'm interested in. So anyway, these both come into the clean, which strips out your markup. I then sort of go to make it wise, and that's basically just doing frequency counting on how popular that word is within Wikipedia or your blog post. So I have 2 arrays basically, and then they come into what score matrix, and I'm basically saying, what are the most top 50 words in Wikipedia for this definition? What's the top 50 words in this blog post? And then just saying it's the top word in the definition and the top word of the post. And when that does happen, and for the first word, it gets, yes, it is there. And the thing I discovered that made this thing work really well was I allocated the weighting that the word was from the frequency in Wikipedia. So this sort of said, yes, I've written about skiing, and it is the top word, but it also gets 300 votes. Whereas I could have just said it was a match, you know. And this turns out to be really important, though I discovered that by accident, to be honest. Normalization, we'll come back to that, and then when we've got all this data, we start to play, and that's what I call lifestyle linking. So we don't want to play God at any time, and this is just a reminder for me to say that. How do every time, Richard? So this is running on PHP 5.3 locally on my laptop, and in the last month I've changed from MySQL to CouchDB. That's not going to with interface. I use the Simple Pi RSS feed reader. I don't know if you guys use that, but it seems to be not being maintained particularly well. But the ARC2 project, which is another open source project, which includes your semantic parsing, is coming along. So I think the community will keep something going. And then I use a Wikipedia API library to query that site. So all being well, the idea is you just key in a Wikipedia definition. And it has to be exactly how they structure it in their URL. And you start the process. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with CouchDB, but you get a thing called a futon. And that just allows you to view the data documents. So I've got 3 here, which are to do with when you query it. They're called views. I won't go too much of that, but what's happening now is it's gone out to the web and it should be knocking on Wikipedia's door and asking for the content for that definition, and it's gone to 2 blogs, which are both mine, and asked for the Atom or RSS feeds. And great, we've got some data coming back. So we'll have a look at this document here. So we just ignore the ID web, that's just how Couch works. So we have this definition, which is the one I typed in, skiing. And here we've got a message string coming back from the thing, but I've split it into its the words that made up the sentences. If you're an NLP, natural language processing person, you might be more interested with full stops and paragraphs where starting and stopping. I more crudely just break it up. So it's quite random as you go through it. It's quite voluminous depending on the article. But as I said, we've cleaned it up and then we've made it wise. And this is just basically a frequency count. And this totally blows me away every time. But I don't know if anybody would, when I say skiing, what's the word that comes to your mind?
Snow.
Snow. Skier. Alpine.
Snowboarding.
Snowboarding. That would be a different definition. We'll come back to that. So here we go. Skiing, alpine, skis, Norman. You know, it's pretty good. And you can do this for pretty much every. I don't think I've come across any frequency count on a Wikipedia definition. It doesn't give you the word that you're looking for as number 1. It just seems to be like a law of nature sitting there, and I haven't been telling the whole truth. There's actually 2 other processes you need to clean up your data, and I sort of inherited these as God assumptions that no word larger than under 2 characters gets included in the list, and I inherited this list. I'm not sure I've got it live. I call it joining language. I think maybe the English teachers call it verbs, but there's sort of like the ands, the buts, the
Stop words.
Yeah, stuff like that. I just got a list from a friend that basically introduced me to data mining and said you have to take these out. And I'm really unhappy that I've got this 2 major assumptions driving it. In fact, he was more harsh. He took out every word less than 3. I compromised and went to 2. However, it sparks innovations when I have got this deployed. So I've now built an application. It's called the confusion quotient. And what the confusion quotient does is take, in a simple word, 2 definitions and just see what the words that are common to both. And the joining language, as I call it, and then if it's snowboarding and skiing, the classic problem, then snow and ice and ski resorts all become sort of familiar, but at least the software started to say, these are the particular unique words in your categorization. So that, I'm hoping that will be better, but I haven't deployed it live. It looks okay in testing, but this may just be the way the world is. So I stick with it. Right, we got even more fast. So we talked about just having the source files, so where it's come from, RSS feed, and then just the source post. I suppose it's a good time to talk about privacy. This is a tool for the individual, and it's my blog, so I'm quite happy. I feel I should be allowed to data mine myself as how I chose, and if everybody did that, then everybody's data mined everything. So here we have examples of those blog posts in terms of frequency counts. So it's interesting that some posts have got a lot of content, and some had, I think the first one just had 3 words and it made it through. And people say, well, isn't that like from a spammer's point of view, the more you write, the more biased it would be, or the more you hit the words? That may be true, but it doesn't seem to be that important when you start aggregating and normalizing. So I didn't bother. I actually did tamper around with saying, well, actually there's 1,000 words in this post and 50 in that one, and I'll treat them differently. But I felt that the results were just the same. So time, energy, commitment to the process. So we've got the definitions, we've got the source words for our charts, and we need to then make them come together. All these numbers look the same. So here we have my first blog, boingjames.co.uk/WordPress, and the only definition we have in the universe is skiing. And so this, for each post, so post 1, does the word match? None. Did any of them score? None. This is more my tech blog. So post number 4 seems to be picking up some trivial scoring. So at the end of this, I start taking averages. So what does this mean? So I think I've got 10 posts there, and I did it on skiing. So all I'm doing is saying, how many of those posts actually scored for this definition? 6 in this case. How many points were allocated across all those scoring posts, 110, and I divided by 6, you get 18.33. Who cares what the number is? It's that we'll go to the next one. So here's my lifestyle linking blogspot one, and we'll see that there's some matches coming through, some higher scoring points being allocated. And if we go to averages, it's a lot higher. There's a more frequency, 18, like 154.4. So the next part of the sort of the puzzle was that at school you're taught when you're learning addition that if you had like coloured bricks and they're green, orange, blue, that you separated out the bricks into the different colours and then you would add up how many of each colour. There's a big problem in that a human life cannot be separated, in my view, into those component parts. We are a whole, and we want to compare apples and oranges, and we want to compare blue with black, and have a universal way of doing this. So all I do is, for each blog post, these averages, so we had 154 here, and it was like, I don't know, 6 or something on the other one. I add those together, and I divide by 2. So I have this like average of average for skiing. And then I say, for each individual blog, how far away are you from that average? Now in a 2-person world, they're just going to be either side of the thing. But if you've got 1,000 people, you start to order the blogs on some weighting system based on the size. And I used the example in swimming. You might have Michael Phelps at the top of the list, and you might have the person that occasionally goes swimming on holiday at the bottom of the list. And me as a master swimmer might be somewhere in the middle. But I can do that for, we'll see, any definition in Wikipedia. A sport, PHP, jQuery. But because it all works on the same way, I can now say how far am I away from my skiing compared to how far I'm away from my Node.js or my PHP. And the next frontier of the science is how do you act or make sense of bringing together those linking criteria. So the simple example is that there's 3 sports and you're all the same on those, and then you are going to add in like tech or PHP, and you are and they're not. Was the 3 sports aligning in your life mean anything in that context? And I've started to do some experimentation. I crowdsource that. But there's so many clever things you can do before you address that problem. So I used to run a website called mepath.co.uk, which is just a holding page. And this taught me the lesson of scale. Because once you have an application, and it was working at 20,000 blogs on a local laptop, then cloud computing was there, and Amazon RDS was just a checkbook, and a slight change to your code, and I created a crawl that went from those first 120 blogs to 35 million URLs. A dirty science, I may add, and it was just a case of getting on with it. And I chose 100 sports in Wikipedia, and regardless of what the blog was, I fired the scoring system at it. And the goal was that when I uploaded my blog, or anybody's blog, I wanted to know the top 5 sports that person was ranking for. But I didn't want it just to be the top 5, I wanted it in the order that I, as a human, interpret my sporting life. And it seemed to do that more often than not. It's the biggest buzz I've ever had in my life, and that happened about 18 months ago. And so I started to realize, or I started asking the question, actually, what was I doing? and hopefully I'm starting to articulate that today. Right. So we've gone sources, we've conditioned it, we've done some intelligence. We need to display, tell the story. And it's taken me a whole year, but I have managed to put an HTML5 interface on this one. And lo and behold, this is half not working, but the definition is skiing. You should have the content coming for your link to Wikipedia. It's not live, but it should be. And all this content, hopefully, is to do with skiing. first started out, I learned from the guy I'm going to talk about in the last part of the talk, and I'd spent like 10 years doing startups and hanging around with AI experts, system professors that seemed to be tracking my curiosity. And I decided 4 years ago to start coding myself. I thought, this can't be that hard. And so the first thing you do is you put all your blogs in, and you just do, once you've learned an SQL statement, I like at skiing. And once you've got a bit of volume of content on there, it's pretty much meaningless. And it's only when you've actually done that you realize how hard a problem it is that we're dealing with here. Anyway, we'll push on here, and given we've got something back, we'll here it's here. Any jQuery guys would like a little button on this toolbar that just popped up and made it active when it needed to be. PHP. So again, this is going out to Wikipedia. I don't have to go out to the blogs because they're sitting there. Obviously, I've written more blogs, and then they may have been updated with PHP posts live from this conference. But because we don't have the time hassle of doing that, it's quite quick. And the only thing I've been talking about in PHP sort of has been this trip to CiviCRM at the end of last year. The rest of the UI, you just have this blog rule. This blog rule would be saying, of the 1,000 swimmers, that would be the order. So a couple of clever things you can do, not implemented, is that if I had 1,000 swimmers and I upload my own blog, it would tell you where you were in the 1,000, say 800. And I played God and said, I'll take 10% either side of that as the first priority in results. So has any of those people authored anything to do with swimming in the time period that I've selected? And in this default case, it's all time. And if they have, I bring back the data. And if they don't, then I have to default to the wider universe. But when you do that, that's when I identify myself with that backcountry skier in Nevada or Utah or California. So I'm meeting up with the guys at Singly, the personal data store, and hopefully they're going to solve all this Flickr delicious aggregation back to your own account. Okay, time's pressing. So, any questions?
Obviously, you've sourced it through Wikipedia, but if you were to look at other data around the world, what about copyright issues?
Copyright. When I had it in my slide, I said I should maybe mention privacy and copyright, I think. Well, it's just going back to this open and share and what Stan should take on that. I mean, Wikipedia, by definition, wants to be open and share. As I said, every blogger on the planet that wants to publish, it's like, do they want to be open and share with that? And my mepath.co.uk was just scaling and breaking that, I would say, that rule. But now I'm giving you an application, like you download WordPress, that you can data mine yourself. And so, I can just come into this slide. I'm saying, data mine yourself, and the next phase of the project is to take your existing tags from Delicious, and then you expose those, and I'd already built in, and then you network them peer-to-peer. Because on your own, you may have your existing RSS feed range, but through the system, you could identify another 20 sources, which may have 20 sources. So hopefully that would be a voluntary peer-to-peer based in it, and this application would then bring back the answers that would have been data mined and then personalize it, given your particular outlook on the view on the world based on your content, and hopefully give you the best content you could get on the web. But I think we are sort of touching on all those issues, and my view is give it to the individuals, and if individuals share, then that's the way the world will be. So this is my point. Big, for me, is lots of little bigs, or small. You can do clever things at small scale. You can do very complicated things very fast at small scale. And I think that's the vision that some people are starting to come to now. So I've shut down my Amazon RDS. And while I haven't solved the peer-to-peer thing, I think people like Singly and others in the community, some of the routing stuff we heard in our earlier talk is all, I think, starting to address that problem of learning and getting the data sort of revealed its source and then networking it to the right place. So how are we doing for time? We've got fine. So I learned a lot from a guy called Dr. Andrew Starsky, who's got a spin-out company called Blueflow at the University of Aberdeen. Sort of collaborated. He was one of those guys with a tool and how do you make sense of it. So he does a thing called self-organization, and because he's got patented, I don't exactly know what the secret sauce is, but we can show you how it works through an example. He's a Liverpool fan, so this may have something to do with it. These are just independent, sentences, and they could be independent blogs, but they're obviously about Liverpool and Everton and what the colour of the strip they wear. And as we read in This Is Human, we include that Everton play in blue and Liverpool play in red. But there is a problem that Liverpool used to play in blue. Now we can read that as a human, and looks like you made it the bold to help me with that. But my text mining application would have no idea how to. It wouldn't work at this level of granularity. The NLP people would probably have a go at it, but it's very difficult. So he's created this technique which produces these sort of stemming charts. And so the branches will expand, but the first node in the system that the data mine application come up with is Everton and blue. And we have this importance thing. And this was my breakthrough in terms of, he was never using this importance score in his application when he was trying to evolve results. And I start to think that when you go to the next stage, we're still in Everton node 1 here, but here we have Everton, Liverpool coming up, but the importance was less. So he's actually managed to capture this differentiation. There's other nodes too. If you clicked on those, then we have some words that probably don't make much sense. But it was starting to show that it could pick out the granularity of quite a tough problem. And of course, if the second branch was Liverpool, then the red and the strip is coming through is very important compared to, so it's like double the score. Now, how exactly the algorithm works and the depths of its processing is probably too hard to explain, but it's basically saying what is the first word in the sentence, and then the second sentence, what is the first word? Are they both the same? Yeah. And of course it's doing it for those 8 sentences. Then it's going to the second word and saying, are the second word the same? And it might be in the second one, not the third one, not the fourth one. And is the third word the same? But then it would start at the second one and say, what was your first word? And go through this round robin process. And then it does summary to collapse them down to the meaningful. So it's sort of taking out this joining language because it's screened out the acts, the buts, the this, etc. Right, wrap up. I don't think there's one solution out there that the Cloudera guys are trying to throw everything in there. I think it's the combination of the big picture with the medium picture with the little picture. So if I've categorized myself as a skier, and I've identified myself as a blogger in California, but I need a specific resort or a particular mountain, then I might do more work to surface the information. Why are we bothering with this really abstract, hard data mapping? Because the future is more human, and we are that complicated, so we have to push the frontiers of computing that way. And we will find these platforms that allow the average web developer to plug them into their CMS system. And my personal view is that personal data will allow those that want to participate in this more granular view of their life to have it. So this was just before wrapping up the whole talk. 4 years ago, I was hanging around with the Drupal guys as an entrepreneur and WordPress, and I read somewhere that 38% of the web was hosted in PHP or LAMP stack, and it looked like they're having great fun with the documentation. That's why I chose it for my #1 language. But right now, sort of rallying call was I feel that we're not even like 0.4% of the data mining community. And I was completely thrilled to see that Ian's ZeroMQ implementation, also machine learning, and so this was a cry out to my sort of limited knowledge to say that we need to probably evolve the language to help us do things. And a few friends have introduced me to Link, which I think is part of the .NET community. So I think that we should probably participate more to get our ideas back into our core development. I found this guy in Japan that started doing this functional programming library for PHP, and maybe now that I've grown up as hopefully a developer, that I can maybe help lubricate that too. So the data web's here, it's growing quick, lots of data play in, still lots of silos, but they're being addressed. Everything will be personalized. Data science is applying the laws of physics to society, and my personal curiosity is that I think information is life. And of course, information is made of data, and I thank you for your time today.